Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, May 12th, and this is the Vermont Legislative Joint Rules Meeting. Today, we are continuing the conversation about how we transition and reopen at the State House with joint committees, joint hearings, and joint assemblies. I just want to start off by saying I recognize that we have a hard stop at 1 p.m., so we'll be mindful of that as we have this conversation about the reopening. At our last meeting, we were talking about how we could use this opportunity during the end of session to January to have committees potentially meet in person to test out what technology and what systems work and doesn't work so that we're really prepared for when we come back in January. And at the end of that conversation, it sounded like we wanted to have Janet Miller, our Sergeant at Arms, and Kevin Moore from IT to answer any questions that members may have. And so I'm looking just to make sure we have them here. And it looks like we do.
Madam Chair.
Hi, Kevin. Can you hear us okay?
We can. Well, the frame will adjust in just a moment. We're trying to display a camera at the moment. And so just kind of give an idea of what it looks like. But Janet's across the table from me.
Hello, Madam Chair. This is Janet Miller. We're just talking a minute to see if it will bring us both up. There you go.
There we are.
Oh, that's very cool. That is so cool.
We're both here and we're happy to answer questions, but we'll get off video so we're not interrupted.
Well, thank you for that example. That's really helpful to see. Thank you for that. All right, so would members like to hear a little bit more from Janet and Kevin, or would you like to open it up for questions? I think, yep, go ahead, Alice. Senator Clarkson.
That's okay. I'm always Allison. So Janet and Kevin, you hold the keys to this experiment. And what we just experienced was your voice activation, the camera focusing on by voice activation. Is that right?
That's correct. So again, for the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT. So it's very quickly thrown together. It is not properly lined up. We just wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of demonstrate it. So if you'll notice in our particular frame right now, there's a panoramic view of everything the camera can see at the top of the frame. So everybody remains in view at all times. However, the active speaker, and we'll transition to Janet in a moment, or set of active speakers, I think up to 3 at any given point, will show up at that bottom frame a little bit larger. But I'll turn it over to Janet so she can demonstrate that quickly.
Hello again, this is Janet Miller. I told Senator Mazza I could sing a song, but he may not want that. So we're just getting my voice out there to show you that there's 2 people up. If we had a ventriloquist, we could bring a 3rd.
Now, obviously, if this is more of a dynamic meeting sitting around the table with 3, 4, 5, 6 people, this would constantly be shifting between those people. It's got a pretty good range to it. It's an all-in-one unit. It's a microphone, a camera, and a speaker in one, so it keeps it pretty simple and it's more portable. Happy to talk more about it, but this is a unit that we are experimenting with to potentially use for the smaller committee groups.
So Kevin, can you give us, just to follow up on this, can you give us a notion of what the sort of, I hesitate to use the word intrusive, but I don't know a better word. What is its physical presence, this camera on our committee? Is it on the table? Is it mounted on the wall?
It's about the size of a half-gallon milk jug, is roughly what it is. It is currently sitting on the tabletop. Yeah, it can't see itself.
Oh, okay.
So that's
right, got it. That's why I'm asking you to use your creative powers to describe it.
Half-gallon milk jug, think about that size. It's about exactly the same proportions and diameter as that. It can be suspended from the ceiling if necessary, and the camera physically inverted to get out of the way. There are certainly options. It can be tripod mounted. There are plenty of different things we can do, but otherwise it's only 2 little wires that go to it. It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple.
And just a last follow-up, if I may, Madam Speaker, the cost of this for 28 or 30 meeting rooms, what is the cost that we're looking at?
So this particular camera is rather cost effective. So again, it's a 3-in-1 unit. This camera is about $1,000. So it's not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of things, but it would not be appropriate for all spaces either. I do want to caution that. This is designed for more of a 15 to 18 foot radius around the camera.
And would it, well, it also includes the witness, or would we have a camera, an additional camera on the witness?
So again, it really depends on the setting. So if we're all just sitting around a table like we're used to, so whether that's a Senate committee room that sits 5 or a House committee room that sits 11 or 12, the witness is usually at the table. So it would capture them as well. If they're on video screen, I'm not sure if you can see in that panoramic view just above, the video could be captured, but it's not really the point of this camera to do so. So we would still be streaming on Zoom. We're looking slightly off of camera because we're looking at that screen where all of you are. And the witness, if remote, would be on that screen too. So it depends on the configuration of the space, but this is a fairly reasonable solution for small to mid-sized meeting spaces.
Just a question regarding the panorama view. Our tables are typically rectangular. The committee is typically on 3 sides of the table and the witness is on the 4th side. I can see how this would work if the camera is on the ceiling, but if the camera is anywhere else, aren't you going to miss at least one side of the table, one of the 4 sides?
So Senator, I'm not sure if you can see on the panoramic view, not me on the bottom part, but I'm actually connected. I'm actually split in half in that panoramic view right now. So you can see my right hand on the left-hand side of the screen,
Okay.
and my left hand on the other side here. So it's 360 degrees. You should get everything. We're at about a 10-foot wooden rectangular table right now. Janet's about 6-7 feet away from me on the other end. So it should capture everybody that's sitting around.
Where is the camera in this room right now?
It is dead center of that 10-foot table.
Okay. Okay.
Right on the tabletop itself.
Any other questions, Senator Brock?
It was just whether or not we should simply equip every legislator with a body cam, but that's another story.
I sadly think that would be more expensive.
All
But
right.
good idea.
I'll just open it up to see if any other members have questions for Kevin or Janet. Any other questions?
Well, I guess the obvious last question is what's our time frame?
So the time frame is still very similar to what we've discussed before. Now, forgive me if I haven't discussed it in joint rules. It's starting to blend a little bit for me. So we're looking at committing to, or have committed to, getting 4 meeting rooms up and running for in-person / hybrid use by August. Now, I know the House resolution, at least originally said, I haven't kept up to speed, 30 days after the governor's executive order, or excuse me, emergency declaration has been lifted. I'm not sure if that's the same language, but we would still want to target early August as a time frame from an IT perspective, due to we only have one of these cameras. We haven't fully vetted it. We want to make sure we can get them all in place and do all that detail work that we've discussed needing to be done in the past.
Yep, Senator Clarkson.
So if we set a time for us to make a decision about a go for the rest of the State House, for all the committee rooms, you would need us to give you the green light by sort of 1st of November, end of mid-October?
Oh, no, far sooner than that, Senator, unfortunately. So the timeline that was proposed during the Freeman report is a fairly realistic time frame to keep in mind. Outfitting other rooms is going to include far more than just the camera. We have to talk about screen integration, microphone integrations. The larger the room, the more challenge that we have. You need more screens, you need more space, you need more camera coverage. And this camera isn't always going to be appropriate. So we're going to have different views depending on the space. So We're still looking at an RFP process, and we're still looking at a contractor to help supplement our staff to make sure that we can get everything up and running and make sure it's successful in the quality that's been come to be expected for January.
Okay.
So as soon as possible is what I'm getting at, Senator.
Yeah.
As soon as practical. I'm smiling. You can't see.
I know, and you can see me smiling.
All right. Any other questions for Kevin or Janet? All right. If you two don't mind staying in case any other questions come up during the conversation, that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, most certainly, Madam Speaker, we'll be here.
And I really appreciate the setting this up for us so we can see what it looks like. Thank you. So members, I think now our next step, we don't, for this committee, our goal is to find consensus on language. We don't need to take a vote, but I would like consensus so that House Rules can send a resolution back to you all about how, back to the Senate in terms of how we transition back in person after we adjourn. And so I was trying to think about the easiest place to start from, just so we had a document to look at and something to work off of. So I was thinking that it might make sense to look at the House resolution around adjournment so you could see how the House, it's very much about how we've been talking about coming back in person for certain committees so that we can test things out and make sure we're ready for January. So unless anyone has a different idea, I think maybe what I'll do is have the clerk pull up the resolution and walk through the components of the transition. We don't need to talk about the May 22nd or the veto session since we already have consensus on how we're moving forward on that, but then the parts moving from there.
Sounds good. Madam Speaker, I will do share screen of the current House resolution.
And for those of you following along at home, if you'd like to pull up the document, it is on the House Rules page, and it's version 3.3. It's also on our House notice calendar today.
So I will do share screen here. Are you able to see this document? Okay, let me see if I can make it bigger.
In all honesty, it's pretty tiny.
Yeah.
Okay, one moment. Sorry about this. Let me try one more time. I'm going to pull this window over here. I have two screens that I work from, and so this should make it easier. Let's try this one more time. Is that better?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank
Great.
you. Perfect.
So this is the House resolution draft that the House Committee on Rules approved yesterday. It will be read for the first time today and placed on tomorrow's House action calendar. There are 3 resolved clauses that are here. As the speaker just indicated, the first one is about remaining remote through any veto session, and the language is through the 30 days following the date on which the governor rescinds all remaining capacity restrictions and mask and physical distancing requirements. The last we generally heard that could happen as early as July or perhaps even sooner. So it'd be 30 days following the governor lifting those restrictions. The second resolved clause, so through that time, the House and its committees could remain remote. The second resolve clause is a just in case resolve clause. This is the ability of the House to thereafter meet remotely if necessary. For example, if after the governor lifts all of those restrictions, if hopefully not, but if there were another COVID outbreak or some other issue with COVID and the governor thereafter reissues capacity restrictions or requires masks and physical distancing in response to COVID-19, then the House Committee on Rules would be authorized to meet remotely in order to permit the House and the House committees to meet, debate, and vote remotely. So it's just a just in case provision. And then the third resolve clause provides that if we're in a time in which the governor has not imposed capacity restrictions and has not required masks and physical distancing, which would mean the House and its committees need to be back in person. But there's during a time in which the House cannot meet in the House chamber according to its rules due to things like space issues, maybe state house construction, the inability to comply with CDC guidelines, or other similar reasons. The House Rules Committee would be authorized to adopt alternative procedures to allow the House to meet, debate, and vote in person in a different manner, either within the House chamber, meaning spread out in the House chamber potentially, or at another physical location. To meet in person if there are spacing issues with the House meeting in the chamber as it customarily would. That's a high-level overview. Madam Speaker, do you want me to address any other details?
Nope, I think you covered it. Why don't we open it up for questions, like clarifying questions about the language that you just saw and heard? Senator Clarkson?
I'm sorry to be a pain.
No.
I thought that you were going to embed the pilot joint meetings in it, and I guess I just missed it unless it was in section 1.
Yeah, go ahead.
Senator Clarkson, so the joint committees would be addressed in, it's currently in JRS 24, which is currently, yeah, so that would require agreement between the two chambers. JRS 24, as adopted by the Senate, is currently in the House Rules Committee, awaiting a further recommendation from the House Rules Committee on how to address the joint committees meeting. And that was something that the speaker wanted to, I believe is what the speaker said, she wanted to get consensus on potentially moving forward with joint committee action.
Thanks, right.
Okay. So what I think makes sense for next steps is that House Rules would take up the joint Senate Resolution 24 and put the recommendations from this committee on there, and that's where we would have the vote. So the question for this group of people is, is this the right format and setup for how we transition back for joint committees and hearings? So I'll open up the floor for thoughts and comments on that.
There's not a lot of options. There's not many options other than this, is there? It's pretty cut and dry, this one. Yeah.
Any concerns about the language?
If I could, Madam Speaker, can I have the Senate Secretary weigh in on any thoughts he might have?
Absolutely. Secretary Bloomer?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Trying to digest it. I think there are a couple different things going on. It's a little more tailored. 3 different circumstances, a little longer language, but I suppose that in attempting to find a good consensus for everyone, sometimes it makes things a little longer or a little more spelled out. Generally speaking, it should work. From my perspective, Senator and Madam Speaker, once again, it is really a matter of getting the joint committees an ability and an authority to meet if they have to. I think that hopefully we're all back and everybody's happy and everything's working really well. But on the other hand, there has to be an out, and I believe that this is workable from our perspective, if I'm understanding it correctly. That's kind of a lot of hedges, Madam Speaker and Senator, but I think the way it's written, it is workable. There are some ambiguities, but I believe it could easily be worked through with just common meetings.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Senator Clarkson.
What if a joint committee would prefer to continue to meet remotely, just in terms of time, travel. I mean, what we found is this saves us, I mean, you can attend this meeting in Zoom much more easily than you have if you have to drive for 2.5 hours. What if they decide over the summer that they'd rather meet remotely? How can they do that?
So I'll look to the clerk if I am incorrect, but this is saying that you have to be back. And that it would be up to joint rules to come back, because we are giving ourselves the authority to, if need be, to say there are some health and safety issues because of the pandemic. And so we can no longer be meeting in person and need to go back to remote governing.
But I guess my point is, what even if we give them the opportunity to come back in person, what if they say, we don't want to be back in person, we want to meet remotely because we can get better attendance by meeting remotely, which in many cases, my guess is that'll be true over the summer.
Well, for other members of the public, we'll always have the option of having YouTube available so people can go into the meetings and watch from wherever they are. If you're talking about certain members, I mean, I think there have been times where people can't make it or they have an appointment, so they call in to hear some of the meeting, but I don't think they would be able to vote remotely. They would, they would have to be there for that.
So to follow up for Senator Clarkson, did you contemplate that option?
No.
Okay. And so my concern is I have several members of my body right now that are dealing with ill members of their family at home, and they've been able to handle work, and they have been, I don't want to, just want to keep everyone's privacy, but we certainly have senators who are juggling home health care for loved ones at home, and they anticipated needing to do that for a certain time based on the session. And now if we're asking them to work over the summer in person, it is not something that we had necessarily contemplated them not having the option of doing hybrid. So I think that's what Senator Clarkson is trying to get at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So Representative McCoy, did I see your hand?
So I think the way the House views this is if the governor is lifting all orders dealing with our the physical distancing requirement, lifting of the masks and everything, except for an emergency order that may or may not stay in place for, some financial reason. We, as the state legislature, the optics of it for us to actually come back in person and do our jobs the way we have been elected to do our jobs. No one has ever come back, and everyone has had issues prior to this with loved ones that they've had to care for, and other individuals that things come up with everyone. And I'm sure 150 members in the House have issues with things, but we've managed when we've had to go back in session come January to May. Summertime, if this is what you're speaking of, Madam Speaker, in the summer, hopefully we're adjourned. So those few individuals that may be on a joint committee is what this will be affecting. And then come January, the sense is we are back, and we are back as a whole body, all 180 of us. So I think that's where the House is coming from.
Senator Clarkson?
I get that, but after it's pretty hard to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris, as we all know, to not be able to enable people who have real challenges driving long distances for joint meetings over the course of the summer and fall, to not enable them to vote and be present remotely is, I think, a real problem. And I think as we transition back to what we hope will be full-time in presence, people have concerns. I mean, we have older members of this body that are still very concerned about younger people And, about the pandemic, I think just because the governor says the emergency's over doesn't mean it's over in everybody's minds or in how they've been functioning. And so I think it's a real challenge if we don't enable, as we go through this transition period into next session, I think it's a real problem if we don't enable people to attend and vote remotely.
Representative McCoy, did I see your hand
Well,
again?
yes, I mean, to that point, I mean, I'm sure the governor's not going to lift these emergency orders without sign. I mean, all we've heard right along through this whole COVID crisis has been they follow the science. They're following the science. So the science is going to dictate whether the governor comes out and says, we are lifting everything and we are back to normal. At that point, the legislature should be back to normal as well. I mean, they're following science. We are back and we are legislating the way we should be legislating, not in a Hollywood Squares box so that so the public cannot come up to Senator Clarkson during a break in a joint meeting that they would like to go and hear and talk to you in person, because they're not there. They're on YouTube. So, we have to get back into, and this is the perfect way to do it. Small groups, joint committees through the summer to see how it goes. That's where the House is coming from. And perhaps, I mean, I'm speaking for the other House members, but I think that's where we were coming from when we drafted this resolution.
And Patty, I appreciate that. I also appreciate flexibility. And I think that as we transition back into being, I haven't found it a problem with people being on YouTube not being in touch with me. I mean, I am amazed how many people call and text during the course of a meeting to let me know how they feel about something in real time. But I would just ask us to consider flexibility, and particularly because I view this as a pilot and transition time. And I don't think you flip a switch and things change automatically in terms of how people have to ease back into feeling normal. I don't think normal doesn't happen overnight. And we've had over a year now of trying to be very careful with each other. And to just do that change overnight, I think is a challenge. So I think I would, and I haven't spoken to my other Senate colleagues here, but I would ask that we consider some flexibility here for being able to participate and vote remotely during the course of the joint meetings during the summer and fall.
All right. So Senator Clarkson, I'm going to give you the last word because it is 1:00 and but I just want to round up this conversation. I think that there's consensus. What I'm hearing is consensus around the trigger around 30 days after the order has been lifted, the just in case provision, if we need to come back as a joint rules to adjust. I'm seeing consensus around that. And it sounds like the last piece for us to talk about is to continue this conversation and maybe have some huddles about hybrid or not hybrid. So we will get another meeting on the books soon to continue this conversation. So be on the lookout for another meeting invitation from the House clerk, and we'll keep this conversation going.